Hi everyone. This video introduces color and images and the way they're handled in web development. We start first by looking at the RGB color model, something we've already seen in class. The way that color is defined in computer science when it comes to light emitting devices such as the monitor is through the use of three channels: RGB, red, green, and blue. Okay, there's a different approach for light absorbing devices such as printers, for example. They use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, so it's just a different approach. We are going to be looking at the RGB model only. Please do remember that these are the three main colors because we may need to use these on occasion, and as we've already seen, we can specify color using several different ways, but for now let's just explore the color names. We can use red for creating red, green for green, blue for blue. If we combine red and blue, we end up with magenta. Combine green and blue, we end up with cyan. If we combine red and green, we're going to end up with yellow. So this is not the way it works in real life. This isn't art. It's really computer science. Let's just remember it that way. If we combine all three of these channels, we end up with white. The graphics on the computer display is accomplished through the use of pixels or pixel elements, individual dots, for which you save the color in memory, and that's how they get displayed in certain colors. Color depth is a term that refers to the number of bits that we use to specify the color. If you only use a single bit, you can represent just two colors, black and white. There's different approaches here, but the most common one is for us to use 8 bits for each individual channel. Okay, now what you're seeing here is the approach adopted with GIF images, GIF. They use 256 colors, and that just means that 8 bits get set aside to represent the color. 24 bits is what we're going to be using, so 1 byte for each individual channel, red, green, and blue. And with 24 bits or 3 bytes, they say that you can represent pretty much every color that the human eye can distinguish. So another way of referring to this approach is true color. How many of these are there? It's 2 to the power 24. I don't know the exact value of that, but it's actually way more than the human eye can distinguish. Now down here there's a comment about 32-bit colors. This really refers to another approach where the fourth channel is called the alpha channel, or the transparency channel, and it's used to indicate how transparent an image should be. If you are using the hexadecimal value to specify color, you're going to be using the hexadecimal digits, and those are 0 through 9 along with A, B, C, D, E, and F. So 1 byte is actually represented with 2 hexadecimal digits, so they're going to go in values from 00 all the way to FF. That's in decimal, that's 0 to 255, and you can see here we've got the red, green, and blue channels. 00 means we got complete lack of color on all 3 channels, so that's defined as black. And FF is full intensity of all 3 channels. That's going to be defined as white. Alright. The sequence of these 3 channels, RGB, red, green, and blue. So if you only have a certain value for the first channel, then you're going to be looking at some shade of red. If you only have a number in the second channel, you're looking at some kind of green. And likewise for the third channel, if you only have a number in the third channel, in the third value or third byte, then you're looking at a blue color. And here's a quick example of some combinations. You don't have to memorize these. You can just explore them um, to get acquainted how these different channels mix and match, so you get some rough idea of how this works, but you don't have to memorize what color matches what code. All of these examples here are valid CSS syntax for specifying color. You can use just the hexadecimal value along with the pound sign in front. This may not be very intuitive to you if you're just getting started with programming, but this is probably one of the most popular approach for specifying colors. And if you get used to this, if you start programming and creating web pages in CSS, then you'll see how this will probably be your method of choice for specifying color. You can also use RGB with a set of decimal values provided inside the parentheses, or RGB with a certain percentage of the intensity of the color on each channel. Just a quick note here: if you are specifying the value of the color using identical digits for all three of your channels, then you can use the shortcut for specifying that by simply dropping one digit from each. So if I had 0000FF, a shortcut way of specifying that would be just 00F. And visually, again, just a few examples here: pleasant lavender, gray, white, black, and the three ways of specifying color. Please do remember that a combination of three equal values will produce some shade of gray. And if you do need to look up color codes, you can easily find quite a few of these tables on the web. I do have a link here for you that you can check out. I've checked it, it works. It gives you a color chart with the codes and the colors. This is similar to what you're going to find on that web page, on that website. The color codes along with their matching colors. You just look at the table, you decide which one you like, which one you want to use, and you go with that. Alright, and some more examples here. Again, you don't have to memorize them. Now, the next couple of slides are there to stress the point that there are certain names that you can use. You don't have to use just numbers, and the original predefined names are the ones you see on this slide right here. There's 17 of them that were defined in CSS2, and CSS3, which is what we're learning here in this class, actually has 140 different names, and some of these are really cool. I advise you to take a few minutes to check out this web page online. Just pause the video, take a look at this website, and it's going to give you a complete list of all 140 color names that you can use. Alright, so please remember there's 4 different ways of specifying color. You can use one of the color keywords, you can use the hexadecimal notation for RGB, the decimal notation for RGB, or the percentages for RGB. Alright, enough about color. Let's move on to images. We're going to do this in some of our exercises along with some of our homework assignments. Images may be added. I believe we've already done that on one occasion, and we do that with the help of the img tag. An image may be turned into a hyperlink to another web page, or, as we shall see near the end of this presentation, an image may be turned into an image map where different parts of the image are actually clickable links that can take you to different websites on the web. And here is the syntax. We do img, that's the tag for including an image, and the attribute source, or src, is what we use to indicate where the file is located. This one right here happens to be, or we're assuming is in the same folder where our HTML web page is, and that's why there's no path leading to it. couple of really important attributes that you can use with images. Alt equals, and then you provide some alternative text. This is what gets displayed if your image doesn't show up in the browser for whatever reason. It's not mandatory, but you're highly encouraged to use this every time, because it helps people see what's going on there, even if your images don't get loaded with the web page for whatever reason. Height and width allow you to adjust the height and the width, or to specify the height and the width of your images. We shall see how these can come in handy. You can use this to tell the browsers to actually alter the dimensions of your image, or at the very least, if you provide the correct dimensions, you give the browsers a heads up about what to expect, and so they know how to order the rest of the elements on the web page. There's three very popular image formats today: GIF, JPEG, and PNG. And I believe there's a Google format called WebP that's not well supported by the majority of the browsers. So I would advise you to, at least for the purposes of your assignments and work in this class, to stay away from that format and only stick to PNG, GIF, and JPEG. We got to be careful about the way we include our images on our web pages. Browsers treat those just as individual keyboard characters, meaning that if you don't provide any formatting, if you don't force the format of your web page to be a certain way, the browser is just going to treat the image as just like another character, and you may end up with something similar to what you're seeing on this slide here. So we got to be careful about positioning and formatting of images, and I'll come back to this, and I'll work with you on this, give you some pointers on how to approach this. This is again just to emphasize the point from the previous slide. If you stick in just a sequence of of images on your web page, they'll be treated like characters, and you may end up with something that looks kind of like this. As you start resizing your browser window, your images are going to be treated like characters and going to move up and down the way they do on this slide right here. They'll also be aligned with the rest of the baseline of the text. Okay, these are things that we can adjust with CSS, with tables, and we're going to do that in class, but just keep in mind for the time being that that's how browsers treat images. Do remember, I believe I mentioned this in class, that your image doesn't have to be on your server or on your computer to display it. Just if you are referencing an image on another computer somewhere online, make sure that it's accessible. In other words, that the administrator on that remote server has provided people with access to the image so that they can share it in this manner. Now, this is just an example here. This image doesn't really exist, so you shouldn't really try it, but it shows you how to link to an image that is located remotely somewhere. Okay. Scaling images. As I mentioned earlier, you can do that with the help of the width and height attributes. Generally, it's advised against doing it or resizing the image using these attributes. The browsers are going to do a pretty good job, but they're not the best tool for the job. I'm actually going to share with you a little program, a free one called Faststone Image Viewer, one of many out there that allows you to resize your images. So with the help of an image editing program, you can customize how your image gets saved, what the quality of the image is, the dimensions, and so on and so forth. In other words, you make sure that you customize your images in an image editing software, not in the browser. I'll be uploading that software shortly, and I will explain how it works in class. Shrinking, it's a good point here. Shrinking the image by scaling it down doesn't really reduce its size. It just displays it as a smaller image, but you still need the same amount of bandwidth and the same amount of time to download that image off of the web server. So keep that in mind. A few examples here. On the following slide, you're going to see 4 different images being displayed. If we back up here, we can see how they are displayed. This is all the cat JPEG, so it's really just a single image, but the browser is setting the dimensions for it, and 2 of these are actually with the same aspect ratio, the first and the fourth one, the big one and the small one here. The other ones, this one is squished and that one is squashed, and you don't have the actual correct aspect ratio. If you are aiming for this kind of effect, sure, by all means, you can use the width and the height attributes of the browser, but if you're not trying to accomplish this kind of effect, just be careful with tweaking those width and height values. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, specifying the correct width and height values for your images does help the browser actually set up the web page for you even before the images get downloaded. So that's a good thing, and that's why you want to have those attributes for your images on your websites, on your web pages. And another recommendation for a good programming practice is to keep things simple by saving your images in the same folder where your HTML code is. Now this is only good really if you have a small website. Okay, if you have only a few images and maybe a few web pages, but if you are working on a large website project, then you definitely need to have a subfolder where you want to place all of your images, something like pictures, for example. And then if you do that, don't forget to always include the path information. Now this is something that we're not really worried too much about nowadays, but 10 or 20 years ago this was really an issue. Always consider or be mindful of the fact that images are larger than your web HTML pages, and they take way longer to download from the standard web pages. So include images if you need them, if you believe they contribute or they add value to your website, then certainly you want to have those. But if they're not really adding any value, they're really just could end up clogging up the bandwidth, and you may be better off by simply providing just plain text web pages. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, interlaced GIFs and progressive JPEGs is another tool that actually helps you with slower internet connections. The way that they work is your images are getting loaded sequentially by skipping lines. So first you load let's say lines 1, 10, 20, 30 and so on. Then you come back and you load lines 2, 11, 21 and so on. This way you end up showing part of the image, but such a part that the user will get a pretty good idea of what kind of image is about to get displayed in their browser. You create interlaced GIFs and progressive JPEGs with the help of image editing programs. There's ways to convert any GIF or any JPEG into an interlaced or progressive one, but you decide as a web designer whether this is something beneficial and whether you want to use this on your website. If you're not worried too much about the web connection of your users, then you're probably better off not using interlaced graphics. But if you want to be completely inclusive and you want your website to look good even to people who use slower internet connections, then you probably find good use for this. Alright, so how do we specify color? I believe we've already done that. The color element is, or a CSS attribute is what we use for the foreground color, and background color is what we use to specify the background color. Please keep in mind that when you design your web pages, there are some combinations that are considered to be good, and there are some that are considered to be bad. You want to use contrasting colors so that people can read the information on your web page easily. If the background and the foreground color do not contrast, then you may end up with something kind of like what you're seeing here on the bottom, which is really difficult to read. I cannot tell you exactly what combinations are good and which ones are bad. This is really something that's in the eye of the beholder. So as a web designer, once you set up your web pages, it's really up to you to decide whether you like what you see, whether it's easy to read and user friendly, or whether it needs some work. Okay. We can apply background colors to pretty much any element on our web pages with the background color attribute. So in this example here, we have a little quote. It's set up as a block quote. We have created a border. I'm not sure we've seen this yet. This is how we can create a border on all sides. It's dashed, it's 4 pixels thick. The foreground color happens to be this color code here, which is kind of greenish looking, and then the background color looks cyanish, but that's the code for the background color. And here's something I'm asking you to do in one of the exercises. Background patterns. How can we create a pattern? We do that with the help of a background image. The image doesn't have to be as big as the screen. In fact, it can never be, because you don't really know the screen resolution of each and every one of your users. Okay, so what we do is we could create a small background image and then tile it horizontally and vertically so that we end up with an image for the entire background. Now this obviously isn't the perfect solution here. This just shows you how an image like this, when getting tiled, may turn out to be to create an effect that they call the pillow effect. So this is obviously a bad solution here, but it just illustrates how tiling works. When we're tiling those images, there are certain attributes that we can use. We can use no repeat to indicate that the image should not repeat. Repeat X to indicate how many times the image should repeat horizontally, or Y for vertically. We can set up a background position if we wanted to, with the help of left, right, center, top, and bottom. And here are a couple of examples. The background position could be left bottom, or right center. And if you provide one keyword, then the missing keyword is assumed to be centered. Alright, and here's an example of a background position. You can see it right up here in the top left. So it says top left, the image is smaller than the screen. It's going to get displayed in the top left corner. Right center is going to position the image to the right along the center line. You can also use actual position pixels to indicate where the position of the image should be, such as in this case 50 pixels off the top going downwards and 50 pixels to the right from the left border. So the top left is considered to be the 0, 0 center coordinate of the coordinate system, and 50 pixels by 50 pixels displaces the image 50 pixels to the right and 50 pixels downwards. And then down here we got background position of 15%, 100%. That means we take into consideration the browser window. We displace the image 15% to the right off of that original position, and 100% down to where the bottom of the background of the browser window is. Some tips for working with images, some guidelines. Try and use simpler images that don't interfere with the legibility of the text, so your users don't experience what they call a cognitive overload. provide a background color that matches your image, so that if the image doesn't cover the entire screen, then you don't end up with something awkward on the screen. Images as links. How do we use those? The syntax for that is, you remember the A element for the anchor. This creates the link. In between those two, you simply place the image element, which is the actual image. So now what happens is this image turns into an actual link that's going to point to some web page on the internet. Alright, a couple of words about when to use which types of images. GIF are generally, it's a good format for simpler line drawn images that have few colors, ideally black and white, but a few colors works too. Or if you want to use the two properties of GIF, and transparency and animation, something that doesn't exist with JPEG. Okay, in all other cases, we generally recommend that you go with JPEG or PNG. The JPEG format is a 24-bit color format. In other words, all the colors are used. With the GIFs, you use 256 colors for each image. So there's a palette that describes which 256 images are being used in the given image. With JPEG, you can use any color using those three color channels, RGB. They're suitable for high-resolution photographs. They employ a lossy file compression, which means that some of the information gets removed and never replaced. Turns out you can get away with something like that because the human eye is not capable enough of distinguishing that some information is missing. Now, if you throw away a lot of information, then the quality of the image is obviously going to go down to the point where you'll be able to notice problems with it. But as a rule of thumb, JPEG allows you to throw away some of the information and still get away with it, with the user not being able to actually discern that. Okay. When do you use JPEGs? When you work with a lot of colors, like photographs, for example. When you need gradient fills and graphics with light sources, and with photographs with many color gradients, such as skies, sunsets, oceans. So if you compare the two, like I said, the GIF allows you to use a lot fewer colors. The files are actually much larger, but you can actually have transparent images and animated images. And if that's what you want, then GIF is your format of choice. On the next slide, we have a good comparison of the two that basically confirms what I just said over the previous couple of slides. We do have a third image type, and that's PNG, the Portable Network Graphics format. It's a relatively recent format, but it's probably my favorite one at the moment. At least to me, it appears to be as powerful as JPEG, but the images are way smaller in size. I'm not really sure how they accomplish that, exactly how this works at the lowest level, and I can't comment on it just yet, but it's a format built specifically for the internet, and it works really well even with images that have lots of colors. On top of that, it also allows you to create transparent images. I did mention interlaced GIFs and progressive JPEGs earlier. Now this is just another set of slides that reminds you of this and shows you some additional examples of how it works, so you get a better appreciation for how these two work. Now with transparent GIFs, you basically pick one of the colors to be considered the transparent one, and then pixels that have that color will become transparent, and you'll be able to see through the images and view the background behind the images. Okay, how do you accomplish this? You're going to need an image editing software similar to Photoshop. And the software that I'm about to share with you, Fast-On Image Viewer, I'm not sure it's capable of that. Photoshop is a paid software that does. It's probably one of the best image editing softwares out there. Image maps, the final main topic for today. Very useful in allowing you to cut up an image without actually cutting it up and specifying that um, individual portions of the image should work kind of like buttons. So if you click on a specific part of the image, you get sent to a specific URL. And here's a quick example. Assuming that this is one big image and it was created in something like Photoshop, for example, but you want these to work like 7 different buttons. Can you do that? The answer is yes, and one really easy user-friendly way of doing it is with the help of an image map. How do we set up the image map? There's 2 different elements, IMG and map, that we have to create. And the IMG element is for the image that has the clickable areas. The map element contains the coordinates for each clickable area. Okay, there's 3 types of areas that you can specify: rectangles, circles, and polygons. Then you have to specify the coordinates for each, along with where you're supposed to be taken when the user clicks that part of the image. And here's an example of the syntax. You start with map. You have to have a closing tag. You give it a name because you're going to need to reference it when you load the image. And then for each one of the shapes, you would do this: shape equals, then you specify what kind of shape it is. Rectangle, for rectangle it's rect. Then you provide the coordinates, which is going to be the top left and bottom right corners of your rectangle. And then href is the location of the web resources you are trying to reference. Then once you're done with this, you simply load the image with the image element, and you include £sign along with the image map, and that's all there is to it. This is how you turn an image into an image map. Let's take a look at an example. Assuming that this is our image, it's got a rectangle, a circle, and a triangle. How can we make this into an image map? And again, I'm assuming here that the dimensions are correct. We're not gonna, now obviously they're not, but let's just, for the purposes of the example, assume that they are. The circle is going to be centered at 106.18, so the value of the x coordinate is 106, the value of the y coordinate is 18, and the radius is 17 pixels. The rectangle is positioned at 1,4 for the top left corner and 60.32 for the bottom right. And the triangle is treated as a polygon, so we simply describe each vertex separately. The vertices for the triangle are located at 170.0, 150.32, and 190.32. Code-wise, this is going to look like this. We start with loading the image. Here's where we say we're using the map called shapes. That's what turns the image into an image map. And then the map called shapes has been defined down here. So we give it a name, and then we list all the parts of that image that are to be considered clickable shapes. We start with a circle, we know the coordinates, we provide a link on the web. We do the rectangle, same thing, we provide the coordinates and then the link, and finally the polygon, which is your triangle. Please do note that we're not using really parentheses here. We simply list the coordinates of each point of each vertex as a pair of values, and then we provide the link. Animated GIFs. The final slide in this presentation reminds you that the GIF format allows you to create little animations without the use of any programming whatsoever. You really just need an image editing program that can help you do this. This is accomplished through the use of multiple images saved as one single image. So the animation actually occurs when you change those images within the browser. An animated GIF could be something made up of 20 different images, and the browser is just going to flip through those. It's going to go through those 20 images in succession and then start back from the beginning. You do not, this is beyond the scope of this class. You don't really create this with HTML or CSS. This is created with the help of image editing software. And the purpose of this slide here is really just to remind you that this is one of the important features or pluses of the GIF format. PNG allows you to do that as well. Okay, and with that we wrap up our discussion of the basics of color and images. Thank you very much for watching.